My daughter and her husband changed the locks on my own house while I was visiting my sister in Thunder Bay, threw my belongings into garbage bags on the front porch, and told me I was no longer welcome. I stood in the October cold, staring at 40 years of my life piled next to the recycling bins, smiled, and made one phone call. 9 days later, they left me 73 voicemails and drove 4 hours to find me, because they finally understood what they'd thrown away. And it wasn't just an old man's furniture. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. The drive back from Thunder Bay had taken most of the day. Highway 17 west, then the long flat stretch through Nipigon, the kind of drive that gives a man time to think. I'd spent 5 days with my sister Marguerite, helping her sort through some boxes from our mother's house, the kind of task that only gets done when someone finally shows up in person to do it. I was tired but peaceful, the good kind of tired that comes from useful work done with someone you love. I turned onto my street just after 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already low. October in Sudbury doesn't mess around, and the maple in the front yard had gone nearly bare. I noticed the bags before I noticed anything else. 4, maybe 5, large black garbage bags lined up beside the porch railing, with a cardboard box sitting open on top. Its flaps splayed out like something had been dumped in from above. My first thought was that they'd cleaned out the garage without telling me. My daughter had mentioned it before I left. "We really need to sort out all that stuff, Dad." I figured she'd gotten ambitious while I was away. Then I saw my winter boots sticking out of one of the bags. I sat in the truck for a moment with the engine running, just looking. The boots were the Sorels I'd owned for 12 years, still good boots. I pulled over to the curb instead of into the driveway and got out slowly. My back had been stiff from the drive, and the cold air hit me the moment I opened the door. I walked to the bags and crouched down beside the open box. Inside was the framed photo from my bedroom shelf, myself and my late wife Carol at our anniversary dinner, the one at the restaurant downtown where the kids had surprised us. The glass wasn't broken, not yet, but the frame had landed face down on a heap of receipts and old birthday cards that had clearly been swept off a surface all at once, without sorting, without looking. Someone had packed my life in about 20 minutes. I found my father's pocket watch in a Ziploc bag stuffed between a pair of dress pants and a rolled-up extension cord. That watch had sat on my dresser for 31 years. Carol used to dust around it every Saturday. I held it in my hand for a long time, standing there on the walkway until my fingers went cold. The key didn't work. I tried it twice, wiggled it the way you do when you think it's a fluke. It wasn't a fluke. They had changed the locks on a house where I had lived for 26 years. A house that, if anyone had bothered to think about it, was still very much connected to my name in ways they had apparently forgotten. I called my daughter first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Denise. Leave me a message." Cheerful. Recorded before any of this. I called my son-in-law. Same thing. Straight to voicemail, his voice brisk and businesslike. "You've reached Gordon Ashby. I'm unavailable right now." I set the phone in my coat pocket and stood on the porch of my own house listening to the wind move through what was left of the maple tree. Across the street, a neighbor I'd known since his kids were in diapers walked from his car to his front door. He glanced over, raised a hand in a vague wave, kept walking. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked why there were garbage bags on the Mercer porch, or why Warren Mercer was standing outside his own front door at 4:30 in October with nowhere to go. I went back to the truck, turned the heat on, and waited. They arrived at 6:15. Gordon pulled into the driveway in the Highlander I'd helped them buy 3 years ago. My daughter was in the passenger seat. I watched them get out, and for a moment they didn't see me sitting at the curb. Gordon went to the trunk. Denise was already heading for the door, keys in hand. New keys. I got out of the truck. "Denise," She turned around. Something moved across her face, not guilt exactly, more like inconvenience. Dad. She crossed her arms. You're back early. It's Thursday. I said I'd be back Thursday. I looked between them. What is this? What are those bags? Gordon put the groceries down on the step. He had the particular stillness of a man who had rehearsed this. Dad, Denise said, we've talked about this. You know we've been needing more space. Gordon's mother is going to come stay with us for a while, and we need the room. We can help you find an apartment. I live here. I've lived here for 26 years. You lived here, she said, and the way she said it, past tense, clipped, like correcting a grammar mistake, hit me somewhere under my ribs. This is my house, Denise. Gordon cleared his throat. Technically, Warren, the house transferred to us when you added us to the title 4 years ago. You signed the papers yourself. We all agreed it was the best way to avoid probate. He said it the way someone says a thing they've practiced saying. Reasonable, patient, like he was explaining something to someone who'd forgotten. The thing was, he wasn't entirely wrong that I had signed papers. I had. 4 years ago, when my doctor had flagged some early heart concerns and my accountant had suggested we sort out estate planning, I'd agreed to add Denise and Gordon to the title as joint tenants. The intention, at least what I had understood the intention to be, was that the house would pass to her without hassle when I was gone. Not that they would rearrange the paperwork and lock me out while I was visiting my sister. I want to talk about this inside, I said. The locks are changed. Gordon picked the groceries back up. We'd appreciate it if you could find somewhere to stay tonight. We'll help cover first month's rent somewhere reasonable. Denise hadn't quite met my eyes through any of this. She was looking slightly past me, at the street, at the tree. Look at me, I said. She did, just for a moment. And what I saw wasn't coldness exactly. It was the look of someone who has told themselves a story long enough that they believe it. A story where this was necessary, where this was reasonable, where I was a problem being managed rather than a father being discarded. They went inside. The door closed. The porch light came on and then, after about 10 seconds, went off again. I stood on the walkway in the dark for a long time. I had helped them buy that Highlander. I had paid for Gordon's dental work 2 winters ago, when he was between jobs and their insurance had a gap. I had babysat their dog every time they went anywhere, had shoveled their walk when Gordon threw his back out, had fixed the basement bathroom myself because Gordon had gotten 3 quotes and all of them were too high. I had never asked to be paid back. That's not why I'm mentioning it. I'm mentioning it because I want you to understand the texture of those 4 years. The gradual, unremarkable way I had made myself useful. The way you do when you love someone and assume it goes without saying. I drove to the Canadian Tire parking lot on LaSalle and sat there with the heat running until I figured out my next move. My brother-in-law Hugh lived 20 minutes away. I didn't call him. Hugh was a good man, but he talked, and I wasn't ready for the family to know what had happened tonight. Not yet. I booked a room at the Hampton Inn on Regent Street, paid with my Visa, carried my bags up myself. The room was clean and anonymous. A bed, a desk, a window looking out at the parking lot. I've stayed in worse. I set my father's watch on the nightstand, took the framed anniversary photo out of the cardboard box, and stood it against the lamp. Carol was laughing in the photo, her head tilted back slightly the way she did when something actually caught her off guard. She died 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I still talk to her photographs sometimes, which I am aware is not a thing men my age are supposed to admit. Should have seen this coming, I told her. You would have seen it coming. She probably would have. Carol had a way of reading people that I had always lacked. I tended to give people the benefit of the doubt past the point where doubt had clearly expired. I lay on the bed in my coat for a while, not sleeping, thinking. What Gordon had said about the title wasn't wrong. I had added them as joint tenants, but I also knew, I was fairly certain I knew, That joint tenancy wasn't the same as handing them the house. I still lived there. I still had rights. The question was whether I'd been outmaneuvered legally, or whether Gordon was bluffing, counting on me not knowing the difference. By 7 the next morning, I was showered and dressed and sitting in a Tim Hortons on Paris Street with my documents folder on the table in front of me. I'd kept that folder in my truck for years. Insurance papers, the deed, tax bills, everything. Factory habits. 34 years at the Falconbridge smelter had taught me to keep records, because the paperwork was always the thing that saved you when something went sideways. I called 2 law offices before 9. The second one, a family and property law firm on Cedar Street, could see me that afternoon. "Bring everything you have," said the receptionist. Gail Trentham was in her late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the manner of someone who had heard more family property disputes than she cared to count. She went through my folder without rushing, occasionally making a note, occasionally holding a page up to look more closely. "Joint tenancy," she said finally, setting the deed on the desk. "You added them 4 years ago." "Yes, for estate planning, so Denise wouldn't have to go through probate. And you've been living in the property continuously since then?" 26 years. She nodded slowly. "Mr. Mercer in Ontario, adding someone as a joint tenant doesn't remove your rights to occupy the property. You remain an equal co-owner. They cannot legally exclude you from your own home. What they've done, changing the locks without your consent, is called unlawful exclusion, and it's actionable." I looked at her. "Actionable. You can apply for a court order requiring them to restore your access immediately. You can also, as a co-owner, apply to the court for a partition and sale of the property if you wish, meaning the court can force a sale and divide the proceeds between the co-owners." She paused. "The house is currently assessed at what value, do you know?" I told her what the last property tax bill had said. She wrote the number down. Turned the notepad so I could see it. "That's your share," she said, tapping the figure she'd written. I looked at the number for a moment. Then I looked up. "What do I need to do?" Gail was efficient. By the end of the appointment, she had my signed authorization to send a formal demand letter and, if necessary, to file for a court order restoring my access. She also explained the partition process clearly, that as a co-owner, I had every right to force a sale, and that in a case like this, where one party had physically excluded another, the court tended to look unfavorably on the excluding party. "They'll probably want to settle before it gets that far," she said. "I don't want to settle," I said. "I want them to understand what they've done." She looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment. Then she nodded. I spent that night in the hotel making a list. Not an angry list, a practical one. Bank accounts in my name only. I'd never added Denise to those, which now struck me as fortuitous. Pension from Falconbridge deposited directly to my account. CPP and OAS coming in monthly. Truck paid off. Savings I'd been adding to for 30 years, partly because Carol and I had always lived carefully, and partly because I'd had nothing much to spend them on these last 4 years except groceries, the occasional fishing trip, and my daughter's dental work. Gordon thought he knew my financial situation. He'd seen me write checks. He'd watched me pay for things. But he'd never asked what was underneath, and I'd never volunteered it, because it hadn't seemed relevant when we were all supposedly family. The next morning I called a realtor. Her name was Wendy Couture, and she'd sold 3 houses on my street over the past decade. I knew her slightly from the neighborhood. She answered on the second ring, and when I explained that I was a co-owner looking to initiate a partition sale, she didn't hesitate. "I'll need the legal documentation confirming your co-ownership," she said. "Can you get me a copy of the deed?" I had it in my hand. We met at a coffee shop that afternoon. Wendy was practical and direct. She pulled up the street's recent sales on her laptop, talked through market conditions, and gave me a realistic price range that was, once I heard it, significantly higher than I'd expected. Prices in Sudbury had moved considerably in the last 4 years. This would be a relatively quick sale in this market, she said. Good school catchment, mature lot, 4 bedrooms. Families want this. List it. She looked at me carefully. The other co-owners, they're aware of this. They will be. I want to tell you what happened next in the right order, because the sequence matters. Day 1, after the listing went up. Nothing. Wendy had the property on MLS by Tuesday morning. I had moved to a furnished month-to-month apartment in New Sudbury. 2 bedrooms, quiet building, a view of the birch trees behind the complex. Basic. Clean. Mine. Day 2. Denise called for the first time. I was in the apartment unpacking books when the phone rang. I looked at the screen, let it go to voicemail. Her voice was confused rather than angry. Dad, someone called about showing the house. I don't know what's going on. Can you call me back? Day 3. Gordon called. Twice. Then Denise again. This time, the confusion edging toward alarm. Dad, please call me. We need to talk about this. I didn't call back. I want to say that was easy. It wasn't. I had spent 68 years being available to the people I loved. Not answering the phone went against something deep in me. I sat with that discomfort, and I let it sit there. Day 5. Wendy texted me. Showing went very well. Young family from Sudbury, been looking for a while, very motivated. They love the yard and the school. Another showing booked for tomorrow. Day 6. 18 missed calls. Gordon had escalated to something close to panic. Warren, I don't know if you understand what this process means legally, but you can't just, we have rights here too. Call me back, please. Denise had called 6 times without leaving a message. Her sister, my other daughter, who lives in Guelph, and who I hadn't told any of this to, called once, clearly briefed, clearly rattled. Dad, Denise says something's happening with the house. Can you call someone? We're worried. I called my daughter in Guelph back, told her what had happened from the beginning. The bags on the porch, the locks, the dark porch light. She was silent for a long time. She didn't tell me it happened like that, she said finally. I didn't think she would. Dad, I'm so sorry. That call was harder than the others. She cried a little, which she would hate me for mentioning, so I'll just say she was upset. We talked for an hour. She wanted to come up. I told her to give it a few more days. Day 8. Wendy called with an offer. Motivated buyers, firm closing, 60 days. The offer was within 2% of asking. I signed the acceptance forms at her office that afternoon, sitting across from a woman who treated me with the ordinary professional courtesy that, after the past week, felt almost startling. The other co-owners will receive notice of the accepted offer, she told me. Their lawyer will need to sign off on the sale as well as co-owners. If they refuse to cooperate, the partition application through the court will compel the sale regardless. They won't refuse, I said. They don't have a better option. Day 9, 73 voicemails. I listened to them in the evening, sitting on my apartment balcony with a cup of tea and the birch trees going pale in the late light. Gordon's voice moved through its progressions the way weather moves through. First controlled, then frustrated, then something raw underneath. We made a mistake. I understand that now. I don't know what else to say. Please call me back. Denise's messages were harder to hear, not because they were more strategic. They were actually less strategic, more unguarded. In one of them she said, I keep thinking about when you came home. I keep thinking about what I said to you. I didn't. I don't know why I said it like that. She stopped and started twice. Please just call me. I don't need you to forgive me. I just need to know you're okay. I sat with that one for a while. Then they showed up in person. I hadn't told anyone where my apartment was, but Sudbury is not a large city, and I had apparently been spotted by someone who knew someone who mentioned it to someone else, which is the way of things here. They knocked on my door on day 9, late afternoon. and I looked through the peephole and saw my daughter standing in the hallway looking like she hadn't slept properly in a week. Gordon was beside her, hands in his pockets, jaw set. I opened the door on the chain. 9 days ago, I said through the gap. You told me I wasn't needed anymore. You bagged up 40 years of my life and left it on the porch. You changed the locks on a house I've owned for 26 years. Dad, let me finish. I kept my voice level. I'd had 9 days to think about what I wanted to say. I want you to understand that I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I passed angry around day 3. What I'm doing is letting you experience what it feels like when the people you trusted treat you like a problem to be managed. Gordon cleared his throat. We can talk about the house. We can figure something out. Maybe we buy you out. Maybe we... The sale is accepted. 60-day closing. Denise put her hand flat on the doorframe. Dad, please, we have nowhere to go. You're adults, I said. You'll figure it out. And I realized as I said it that those were almost exactly the words her husband had used to me 9 days ago. I don't think she caught it, but I did. I closed the door gently, not slammed, just closed. I won't tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt tired and a little hollow and very aware of the quiet in the apartment. I stood in my kitchen for a few minutes, then put the kettle on, because that is what you do. The sale closed on a Wednesday in December, 58 days after the accepted offer. I was at the lawyer's office by 9 in the morning. The buyers were a couple in their mid-30s, both teachers, 2 kids already, and the third on the way. They'd found the house at the first showing and hadn't looked at anything else. The wife kept thanking me, which I wasn't expecting. We've been looking for almost a year, she told me while we waited for the papers. We were starting to think we'd missed it. The yard is good for kids, I said. There's a rink pad at the end of the block. They flood every winter. She wrote that down on her phone. I don't know why that detail caught me. Maybe because it was such an ordinary piece of information about an ordinary house where ordinary things had happened for 26 years, and now someone new would know it, and the house would go on being useful in the way houses are useful. Gordon and Denise had signed their portion of the paperwork through their own lawyer. No meeting required. Gail Trentham told me it had been a tense process on their end, but they'd cooperated in the end. They didn't have a choice, legally, but they cooperated. The proceeds were divided according to co-ownership percentages. My share landed in my account 2 days after closing. I bought a used fishing boat the following week. Nothing extravagant. A 16-foot Princecraft. Good condition. Previous owner had kept it well. I've been thinking about a boat for years. The kind of thought you keep putting off because there's always something else the money should go to. Now there wasn't. I drove out to Ramsey Lake on a Thursday afternoon in early January. Too cold to launch, obviously, just to look at it sitting on the trailer in the storage yard. And I stood there in my coat with my breath making small clouds and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like myself, I had called Denise twice since the closing. Short calls. She was staying with Gordon's cousin in the valley while they figured out their next step. The conversations were careful. The way conversations are when something real has happened that hasn't been fully processed yet. She didn't apologize in so many words. But, she said in the second call, I think I forgot that you were a person. She said it quietly like she was still working out what it meant. I didn't say anything for a moment, and then I said, I know, because I think she had. I think that's what happens sometimes, gradually. So gradually, neither person notices until one October afternoon when the garbage bags are already on the porch and the key already doesn't fit. I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment now, east end of Sudbury, 4th floor, view of the Nickel Range on a clear day. My sister Marguerite visits sometimes. My daughter and Guelph came up for New Year's, and we cooked a proper meal and stayed up too late. The Princecraft goes in the water in April, assuming the ice cooperates, which it rarely does on the first date you plan. I still talk to Carol's photographs sometimes. It's on the bookshelf now, next to my father's watch. I told her about the boat. She would have asked about the motor horsepower and told me to get the life jackets inspected. That was Carol. That was the thing about her. She always made sure the practical details were handled before she let herself feel good about something. The practical details are handled. Sometimes the right response to being thrown away is not to beg to be taken back, but to show people, quietly, legally, without a word raised in anger, exactly what it was they thought they could afford to lose.